For decades, Audrey Hepburn existed as a finished picture in the public imagination. Not a person evolving through time, but a still frame that never aged, never cracked, never asked for understanding. Her image felt complete the moment it appeared. The slender silhouette, the quiet smile, the posture that suggested she had never known chaos. People assumed that a woman who moved so gracefully through space must have moved just as gracefully through life. But images lie by omission. What they leave out is often where the truth lives. Long after the applause ended, her son began to speak, not with bitterness or revelation, but with tenderness. He didn't want to expose his mother. He wanted to return her to herself. Audrey's early life looked safe from the outside. Born in Europe between cultures and languages, raised among adults who spoke of art and tradition, her childhood appeared privileged. But children don't measure safety by geography or status. They measure it by who stays. When Audrey was still very young, her father left the family without warning. No explanation, no goodbye that a child could understand. One day he was there, the next he was. That kind of disappearance doesn't just create sadness. It creates a permanent question. According to her son, this moment planted the deepest fear of Audrey's life. The fear that love could vanish without notice, and that stability was never guaranteed. After her father left, silence filled the house in new ways. Her mother carried grief tightly, the way women of her time were taught to do. Financial stress crept in quietly. The home no longer felt expansive, it felt careful. Audrey learned early that emotions were things to manage, not express. She watched adults endure without language, and she copied them. By the time she reached adolescence, restraint felt natural to her. She didn't learn composure on film sets. She learned it at the dinner table, in rooms where no one spoke about what hurt. Then the world itself became unsafe. When war spread across Europe, Audrey and her mother moved to the Netherlands, believing neutrality would offer protection. It didn't. Occupation changed everything. Fear became daily. Hunger became normal. Food was no longer something you wanted, it was something you waited for. Audrey's growing body was deprived of what it needed, and the damage lasted a lifetime. The frame the world would later admire was shaped by starvation, not fashion. Her son later explained that what people mistook for delicate beauty was actually the physical memory of survival. But war doesn't only harm the body, it trains the mind. Audrey watched neighbors disappear. She learned that noise attracted danger. That silence kept you alive. These lessons stayed with her long after peace returned. Even when she smiled, part of her was listening. Even when she relaxed, part of her stayed alert. The world would later describe her as serene. In truth, she was vigilant. As a teenager, Audrey did not resist loudly. She resisted quietly. She danced in secret gatherings to raise money for the resistance. She carried messages hidden in her clothing. These were not heroic acts designed for recognition. They were acts of necessity and belief. According to her son, she rarely spoke about them because she never connected courage with attention. Doing what was right did not require applause. This belief would follow her into fame and shape her discomfort with praise. Dance became Audrey's refuge long before it became her ambition. Ballet offered order when life had none. Positions were exact. Movements had purpose. Progress could be measured. For a child who had learned that safety could disappear overnight, ballet offered something rare: predictability. Even during the worst years of war, she trained whenever her body allowed. Dance wasn't about the stage. It was about control, about proving that effort could still lead somewhere. After the war, Audrey pursued ballet with absolute seriousness. She believed discipline could overcome damage, but her body had already paid its price. Years of malnutrition left her chronically weak. When she was finally told that her body could not support a top-level ballet career, the loss was quiet but devastating. There was no dramatic collapse, no public mourning. She simply adjusted the way she always had. According to her son, this was one of the deepest disappointments of her life, not because she failed, but because survival had taken something she loved. Acting entered her life not as a dream, but as a solution. She took small roles, modeled, worked constantly. There was no hunger for celebrity. Fame was not the goal. Stability was. Acting was simply the path that remained after ballet was taken away. This distinction matters because it explains why success never felt secure to her. She hadn't chased it. It had arrived anyway. When Audrey was cast in Roman Holiday, she was unprepared for what followed. The film made her instantly visible to the world. Audiences were captivated by her softness, her restraint, her emotional economy. Gregory Peck recognized her presence immediately and insisted she be credited equally. Awards followed. Praise flooded in. But internally, Audrey felt exposed. She was being celebrated for traits she had developed to survive fear and loss. The world called it charm. She felt like she was being seen without protection. Hollywood was loud. Audrey was quiet. She never felt fully at home among ambition and spectacle. According to her son, she often felt like an observer inside her own success. She belonged to the work, but not the environment. This sense of displacement followed her into later roles, including the one that would define her image forever. In Breakfast at Tiffany, audiences saw glamour and freedom. Audrey saw loneliness. She understood Holly Golightly instinctively, the performance of joy, the avoidance of attachment, the fear of needing too much. The black dress became iconic, but Audrey focused on the ache beneath it. She wasn't acting vulnerability, she recognized it. Marriage for Audrey was meant to mean safety. With Mel Ferrer, she hoped to build permanence. Instead, the relationship became complicated by imbalance and control. Audrey gave herself fully. Friends later suggested she gave too much. During this marriage, she suffered repeated miscarriages. According to her son, this grief eclipsed all others. She wanted a child not for fulfillment, but for continuity, to create the presence she had once lost. When her son was finally born, the bond was profound. It wasn't just love, it was relief, healing, proof that something could stay. Motherhood became the center of her emotional world, but the marriage did not stabilize. The relationship ended quietly, leaving behind devotion that had not been equally returned. Her second marriage offered hope, then repetition. Infidelity entered. Distance grew. Once again, Audrey absorbed disappointment without spectacle. She had learned how to endure silently long before she learned how to perform. With Robert Wolders, something finally changed. There was no drama, no power struggle, just steadiness. According to her son, this was the first time Audrey felt emotionally safe. She later described these years as the happiest of her life, not because they were exciting, but because they were calm. As her personal life stabilized, Audrey stepped away from acting, not because opportunities vanished, but because her need for validation did. Her priorities shifted inward. Motherhood, routine, and quiet joy became central. She gardened, read constantly, sketched, and lived deliberately small. Fame had never been her anchor. When Audrey accepted her role with UNICEF, it was not symbolic. It was personal. She had been a hungry child once. She understood fear from the inside. According to her son, humanitarian work wasn't something she did, it was who she was. She insisted on being present, on holding children, on listening. These journeys were physically demanding, especially as her health declined. But Audrey refused to distance herself from suffering. Compassion required proximity. Even when her body weakened, her resolve didn't. Her illness arrived quietly. Cancer spread silently. She feared pain more than death. One of her deepest regrets was that she could no longer travel to help others. Even then, her concern was outward. Her final Christmas at home in Switzerland became a moment of peace. Surrounded by those she loved, she called it the most beautiful Christmas of her life. Even then, she gave gifts meant to comfort others. Audrey Hepburn passed away peacefully, leaving behind an image the world thought it understood. But her son offered something better than myth, context. Elegance was not effortless. It was earned. And knowing that doesn't diminish her beauty, it finally makes it human. What changes once you know the full shape of Audrey Hepburn's life is not admiration, but understanding. Her softness stops looking fragile and starts looking deliberate. Her silence no longer feels mysterious, it feels earned. The way she held herself, the way she listened more than she spoke, the way she never chased attention even when it followed her everywhere. All of it traces back to a child who learned that safety depended on awareness, restraint, and emotional control. Audrey did not float above pain. She carried it with her, learned its weight, and adjusted her posture so it wouldn't crush her. That adjustment became what the world later named grace. Her son's confirmation does not rewrite history. It corrects the lens through which we see it. Audrey Hepburn was not a woman untouched by suffering. She was a woman shaped by it, refined by it, and eventually guided by it. Every choice she made later in life, stepping away from fame, prioritizing motherhood, committing herself fully to humanitarian work, reflected a person who no longer needed applause to feel real. She had survived too much to mistake admiration for meaning. What mattered to her, in the end, was presence. Being there for her children, for vulnerable strangers, for moments that did not require cameras to exist. So when we remember Audrey Hepburn now, perhaps the most honest way to do so is not by repeating the myth, but by honoring the human beneath it. A woman who endured abandonment, hunger, war, and loss, yet chose kindness without spectacle. A woman whose elegance was not inherited but constructed, slowly, painfully, and intentionally. Her story does not become smaller when we see the truth. It becomes larger. Because grace that is learned through survival carries more weight than grace that is simply given. And that is the Audrey Hepburn who remains, long after the image fades.